John sat in the small control room of the ship, staring at the flickering screens in front of him. The hum of the engine was a constant companion, vibrating through the floor and into his bones. It was supposed to be a routine mission, scanning. A nearby star system sending data back to Earth and then heading home. Nothing too complicated. But then the communication came. At first, it was just a brief blip on his radar, a transmission so faint he almost missed it. He thought it might have been a glitch, or maybe interference from the dense space clouds they were passing through. But then the message started to play, and John's heart skipped a beat. The voice that came through wasn't human. It was smooth, musical and strange, something completely unfamiliar. The words weren't in any language he knew, yet somehow they felt personal. Human male identified. Designated partner. Zura. Prepare for immediate arrival. Your assigned wife will arrive. In 48 hours, John blinked in disbelief. Assigned wife. This couldn't be real. He looked around the empty room as if someone else had heard the message. No one had. It was just him and the ship. He slapped the console, hoping it would stop the bizarre message. But it didn't. The voice continued. All human males are required to pair with an alien spouse. This is an official interspecies regulation. The assigned wife will arrive shortly. Compliance is mandatory. He sat there frozen. His mind raced. This had to be some sort of joke, right? Maybe some sort of bizarre test. He ran his hand over his face. He was alone on the ship. Maybe the isolation was getting to him. He tapped the communicator again, hoping to contact anyone on Earth. But there was nothing. Just silence. The ship's systems were operating fine. The usual beeping sounds filled the room, but John couldn't focus on them. His thoughts were swirling. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. A wife assigned to him? And from what? An alien species? John had been to other planets before, dealt with alien species, but never anything like this. He had heard of some intergalactic diplomacy efforts, but a marriage? That was something completely different. He tried to shake it off. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe there was some sort of misunderstanding. Still, his mind kept returning to the strange message. Wife? How could that even be possible? He wasn't even married back on Earth, let alone paired with an alien. His stomach churned at the thought. John wasn't sure how to feel. Anger? Confusion? Embarrassment? Was this a requirement for his job? His mind went back to the message. Prepare for immediate arrival. That part stuck with him. They were serious about this. Whoever this Zura was, she would be arriving soon. The hours ticked by slowly, the ship's engines still humming as John walked back and forth in the tiny control room. He tried to focus on the tasks he had been given to distract himself. But the more he thought about it, the less he understood. How was he supposed to just accept this? His whole life, he'd been raised to believe in freedom, freedom to choose, to make his own path. And now, some unknown alien civilization had decided that he needed a wife, a partner. His mind wandered to thoughts of Zura. What kind of alien would she be? He imagined all sorts of strange possibilities. A towering figure with multiple arms, a giant glowing being from the stars, or maybe, just maybe, she would be human-like, with only a few subtle differences. The thought of marrying an alien was absurd, but the more he thought about it, the less absurd it seemed. If this was part of some grand diplomatic effort, it might be unavoidable. Suddenly, the ship's communication system chimed again, interrupting his thoughts. He froze. He hoped it was some sort of error, but the voice from before returned. Calm, unfazed, unbelievably polite. Human male John. Zura will be arriving in approximately 48 hours. Please prepare for her arrival. Failure to comply with the assigned pairing will result in penalties. We expect full cooperation. Your wife's name is Zura. She will be the one to guide you through the initial stages of your new partnership." John leaned back in his chair, his head spinning. His eyes went to the stars outside the window, the infinite darkness stretching endlessly. He didn't know what he was more afraid of, what was coming, or the idea that this was actually happening. The message ended, leaving an eerie silence in the control room. The weight of the situation hit him again. 48 hours. He had less than 2 days to prepare for something that no one could have ever prepared for. John stood up and walked to the ship's window, staring out into space. He had no idea who or what this Zura was. All he knew was that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet understand. He would have to meet her. He didn't know what he was supposed to do, but he couldn't back out now. The universe had a strange way of pulling people into unexpected situations, and he had just been pulled into one that he couldn't even begin to make sense of. As the stars twinkled in the distance, he let out a deep breath. Whatever was coming, he would face it head on. The universe might have a plan for him, but that didn't mean he had to like it. And so, with a mixture of dread and curiosity, he waited. John sat at the control room desk, his hands gripping the edges as he tried to make sense of what was happening. The transmission had ended, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Assigned wife. The words echoed in his mind like a drumbeat he couldn't escape. He rubbed his eyes, trying to focus, but every time he closed them, the image of a petite alien woman with glowing blue skin and a mysterious smile flashed in his mind. The thought made him uncomfortable, but it wasn't just the idea of having a wife assigned to him. No. What disturbed him more was the fact that the voice, calm and unemotional, had talked as if it was completely normal, as if this was something everyone had to do. His thoughts wandered to Earth, to the way things had always been. People got married because they wanted to, not because they were told to. Human relationships were built on choice, not on some intergalactic mandate. How could this be happening? He asked himself again. The ship was silent now, save for the occasional hum of the engine and the distant beeping of the control systems. John glanced at the countdown timer on the console. It was set for 48 hours, and it was ticking down, second by second. His heart skipped a beat. He had no idea what to expect when Zura arrived, or even what to do when she did. But there was no turning back now. He stood up from the desk and walked over to the ship's small observation window. The stars stretched endlessly in front of him, their light bright and cold, filling the dark space with their distant glow. For a moment, he felt the weight of isolation. No one else on Earth knew what he was going through right now. No one else could understand. He was just a soldier doing his job. He had signed up for deep space missions to help make contact with alien species, to collect data, to explore. But this was something he hadn't been trained for. There was no manual for alien marriages in his briefing materials, He stared at the stars. John thought about the voice's words. Your assigned wife will arrive shortly. What did that mean? Would she just show up? What would she be like? The thought of meeting her made his stomach twist. He didn't know what to expect, and that made everything worse. A sudden chime from the console broke his thoughts. It was another message, but this time it wasn't the same calm voice. Instead, it was a message from the ship's AI system, which had been quiet up until now. John, the ship is scheduled to make a stop at a nearby space station for a brief. Resupply. This will be your last chance to prepare for Zura's arrival. Please check the docking bay for any necessary adjustments. He sighed and walked toward the docking bay, trying to distract himself with something, anything, that might make this situation seem more real. The thought of standing face to face with an alien who had been assigned to him was too much to handle. He needed to focus on something else, even if just for a little while. When he reached the docking bay, John was greeted by the quiet hum of the ship's maintenance systems. He could see the dark outline of the space station in the distance through the large viewing window. It was an old station, a relic from a bygone era, but still functional. He stepped inside, glancing at the tools scattered across the floor and the spare parts that lined the walls. He felt out of place here, as if the station wasn't just a resupply point, but a symbol of how out of touch he felt with the world around him. John began checking the equipment, forcing himself to concentrate on tasks that had nothing to do with his impending meeting with Zura. He cleaned the ship's communication equipment, recalibrated the navigation system, and even double-checked the supplies. But nothing seemed to make the situation feel less absurd. Every time he focused on a task, his mind would drift back to the message, to the idea of a wife, and to the unknown alien who would soon be standing before him. The hours passed slowly. He didn't speak to anyone, didn't try to contact Earth again. The station was quiet, and he preferred it that way. He needed the silence to think, but thinking only made him more anxious. The countdown clock kept ticking, and he knew that in less than a day, his life would change forever. Finally, as the resupply was nearing its end, John returned to the control room. He sat down in front of the console, staring at the screen. The stars outside were still as beautiful as ever, but now they seemed cold and distant. The ship felt even more isolated than before. There was no escaping what was coming. His mind raced as he thought about what he was supposed to do when Zura arrived. What did she expect from him? What was this marriage supposed to be like? He didn't have answers. All he had were more questions and a growing sense of dread. Would she be angry with him for being reluctant? Would she see him as just another human male who had been forced into this arrangement? The thought of being with someone so different, was almost too much to handle. As the hours ticked away, John's stomach tightened. He could hear the faint whirring of the ship's systems, feel the vibration in the floor beneath him. The 48-hour countdown was almost up, and he couldn't avoid it any longer. John stood in front of the ship's observation window, staring out at the swirling emptiness of space. His mind was a mess of confusion and worry. The countdown timer on the control console now had only a few hours left. Zura, the alien woman he had been assigned to, was coming. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of being she would be. What would it be like to have a wife, especially one from another planet? And more importantly, why did it have to be him? He ran his hand through his hair, the tension growing by the minute. The ship was now on its final approach, slowly, making its way to the location where he would meet Zura. The docking bay was ready, everything prepared. All he had to do was wait for the arrival. It was so surreal. John had spent years in deep space, meeting different alien species, learning about their cultures, and engaging in diplomatic missions. But never, in all his years, had he imagined something like this, a wife, assigned by an alien government. He glanced at the clock again. The minutes seemed to drag on, each one heavier than the last. He could already feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. With a deep sigh, John turned away from the window and began pacing. He had to be prepared. But how could he prepare for something as bizarre as this? What was he supposed to do when she arrived? Should he treat her like a colleague, like a fellow diplomat, or should he follow the strange new rules that had been laid out for him? There were so many questions and no answers. As he walked, he noticed the small, almost imperceptible hum of the ship's systems. It had become so familiar to him over the years that it almost felt like a part of him. It was as if the ship itself was waiting too, anticipating the unknown arrival. The steady sound only reminded him how much he had taken for granted. The silence between him and the crew, the stillness of space, all of it was about to change. He stopped in front of the console and checked the status one last time. The docking bay doors were opening, and soon Zura would be there. The anticipation felt like a weight on his chest. He didn't know what to expect. He didn't know anything about her except that she was assigned to him. He didn't even know what she looked like. The message hadn't given any details, just that she would be arriving shortly, and that their pairing was important for interspecies. Relations. Was that all? A political maneuver? Or was there something more to it? John couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this was more than just an assignment. He felt as if he was being swept along by forces beyond his control. The more he thought about it, the less in control he felt. He couldn't keep pacing forever. He needed to focus, to prepare, to meet her when she arrived. But how could he? He had no idea what was expected of him. How was he supposed to behave? He wasn't trained for this. There was no guidebook for a human soldier who had suddenly found himself in a situation like this. No training on how to live with an alien wife, let alone how to make it work. John let out a frustrated breath and leaned against the control console. He stared out the window again, watching the stars pass by in a blur. The ship was now just moments away from docking, and his thoughts raced even faster. Suddenly, the ship's PA system crackled to life. A soft voice echoed through the speakers, smooth and clear. "Human male John, please prepare for the arrival of your assigned partner. Zura will be entering the docking bay momentarily. Please proceed to meet her." John's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't stop the cold rush of nerves that flooded his body. This was happening. It was real. Zura was coming, and soon he would have to face her. He didn't know why, but a part of him expected the worst. He had no idea what kind of reception he'd get. Would she be angry? Would she expect him to act a certain way as though everything was normal? Or would she be just as confused as he was? The thought of her, the alien woman who had been assigned to him, was all-consuming. The PA system clicked off, and John stood frozen for a moment. He had to move. He had to meet her. He had no choice. Steeling himself, he left the control room and made his way to the docking bay. Each step felt heavier than the last, and the closer he got, the more his stomach twisted. He tried to push the nerves away, to focus on the fact that this was just another mission. But it wasn't just another mission. This was personal. As he reached the door to the docking bay, John took a deep breath and stepped inside. The sound of the ship's machinery buzzed in the background, and the lights in the docking bay flickered overhead. The area was spacious, with a clear view of the platform where Zura's ship would land. Then, just as the door hissed closed behind him, John heard the faint sound of an approaching craft. His heart raced, and his hands felt cold. The ship, a sleek silver craft unlike anything John had ever seen before, descended slowly into the bay. The doors opened with a soft whoosh, and there, standing before him, was Zura. She was small, barely, reaching his shoulder, with skin that glowed a pale blue. Her eyes were a striking shade of green, filled with curiosity and intelligence. She wore simple clothes that seemed to shimmer slightly, and her face held a soft, welcoming expression. She wasn't at all what John had expected. Zura smiled at him, a delicate, almost mischievous smile. "Hello, John. I'm Zura," she said, her voice soft but filled with warmth. John stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to say. He had imagined her to be alien in a way that was completely different, more threatening, more intimidating. But she wasn't. She was human-like in a way, and that was both reassuring and terrifying at the same time. She stepped forward, her movements graceful and confident. "I believe we have much to learn about each other," she said, her tone light. "Humans and aliens together." John stood there, his mind struggling to keep up with the moment. Zura was standing in front of him, a small figure compared to his own height, but there was an undeniable presence about her. Her green eyes studied him with curiosity, but there was no judgment, no hostility. just calmness. It caught him off guard. She smiled again, a gentle, almost playful smile that made John's nerves settle, just a little. She spoke again, her voice light, as if they were old friends having a casual chat. "I know this is strange for you," she said, her words laced with understanding. "But it's strange for me, too. This pairing wasn't my choice either." John blinked, surprised by her honesty. He had been preparing for awkward small talk or for her to start giving orders, anything that would reinforce the idea that he was being forced into something. But this felt different. She wasn't trying to pretend that everything was normal. "You didn't choose this?" John asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zura shook her head. "None of us had a say. It's the law. But that doesn't mean it has to be bad. We can make it work, if you want to." John felt a strange flicker of something. He wasn't sure if it was hope or disbelief. He hadn't expected this kind of response. It wasn't just a political assignment. To her, it seemed like she genuinely wanted to make the best of the situation. He wasn't sure how he felt about that, but it made him question everything he had assumed up to that point. He cleared his throat and tried to gather his thoughts. "So, what happens now?" Zura's smile widened. "Now we start. I'm your partner, as weird as it sounds, and we have to get to know each other. There's no rule that says we can't make this work, right?" John didn't know how to respond. He wanted to argue, to tell her that this wasn't how things worked in his world, that relationships should be built on trust and choice, not forced by an intergalactic law. But looking at her calm demeanor and willingness to embrace the situation, made him pause. "Okay," he finally said, his voice a little more steady. "I guess we can start with dinner?" Zura's eyes lit up, and she nodded eagerly. "Yes, I'd love that." It felt oddly natural, even though everything about this situation was anything but natural. John led her toward the ship's small kitchen area, still unsure of what to say or do. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't easy either. He didn't know how to interact with her, how to bridge the gap between their worlds. She was an alien, and he was human. They came from entirely different backgrounds, from different planets, different cultures. As they sat down at the small table, Zura started asking him questions about Earth, about his life, his people. She was genuinely interested, and that caught John off guard. He had been expecting her to see him as just another soldier, another human who had been assigned to her. But her curiosity made him feel like she saw him as more than that. They talked about everything: Earth's history, the strange traditions Huma, and as had the foods they ate. John explained some of Earth's most basic customs, like how humans celebrated birthdays and what holidays meant. Zura listened intently, asking questions along the way. In return, she told him about her planet, about her people. It wasn't like Earth, she explained. There were no major holidays or celebrations, no big family gatherings. Her species didn't experience emotions in the same way humans did. It was a little unsettling for John to hear about it, but there was also a kind of beauty in it. Everything was so orderly, so calculated. He couldn't help but ask, what's it like, living in a world where emotions don't shape everything you do? Doesn't it feel empty? Zura paused for a moment, considering his question. It's not that we don't have emotions, she said slowly. We feel things, but we don't let those feelings control us. It's more efficient that way. We have learned to be logical. We rely on reason more than impulse. John nodded, understanding but still a little baffled. I can't imagine a world like that, he admitted, where everything is so controlled, where people don't just act on their feelings. It sounds lonely. Zura's eyes softened, and she tilted her head slightly. It's not lonely. It's just different. But I understand your world better now. Humans seem to be driven by emotions, by connection, and that's something I admire." John shifted, uncomfortably in his seat, the conversation making him feel exposed in a way he hadn't expected. He wasn't used to being so open with someone, especially not an alien assigned to him by a government. But there was something about Zura that made it easier. Something that made him want to understand her, even if it didn't make sense. "So," John said, trying to lighten the mood, "what's the first thing we're supposed to do as partners?" Zura smiled. "I don't know. Maybe we start by getting to know each other better. If we're going to make this work, we'll need to understand each other, who we are, where we come from." John nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A small step toward understanding this bizarre situation. As they finished their meal, the awkwardness between them started to fade. They weren't exactly friends, not yet. But it felt like they might get there. Maybe. John couldn't shake the thought that this whole thing was still a giant mess, that they were both trapped in a situation neither of them had chosen. But as he looked at Zura, he realized that maybe it didn't have to be all bad. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something more than just an arranged partnership. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe it wasn't so impossible after all. The days seemed to blur together as John and Zura adjusted to their new routine. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't unbearable either. John had expected everything to be awkward, filled with long silences and uncomfortable exchanges. But Zura, to his surprise, had a way of making things feel normal, or at least less strange. They spent most of their time talking, sharing stories about their lives, their worlds, their cultures. It was like they were trying to find some common ground, some shared experience that could make the situation more bearable. At first, John had kept his distance, unsure how to truly connect with her. He had been trained for combat, for exploration, for diplomacy. But this was personal, and John wasn't sure how to handle it. He had never been very good at relationships, let alone forced partnerships. He had spent so much of his life focused on the mission, on the next assignment, that he had never really stopped to think about what it meant to be with someone, especially someone like Zura. But slowly he began to see things differently. Zura's calm presence, her willingness to adapt, and her quiet curiosity about him began to make him feel like maybe this was something worth trying. One afternoon, as they sat together in the ship's small common area, Zura asked a question that took John by surprise. "Do you ever miss Earth?" she asked, her green eyes meeting his. John hesitated, the question catching him off guard. It wasn't something he had thought about much. He had been so focused on the mission, on survival, that Earth had become a distant memory, a place he'd left behind long ago. But now, with Zura's soft voice filling the space, he realized how much he had missed it, how much he had missed home. "Yeah, I do," he admitted, his voice quieter than usual. "Sometimes. It's easy to forget out here. But when you're alone in space, when it's just the stars and the silence, you start to remember things. The way Earth smells, the way the air feels. I never really thought I'd miss that. But I do." Zura nodded, as if she understood. "I can't imagine what it must be like for you, to be so far from your home. It must be isolating." John chuckled, softly. "It can be, but I guess we all get used to it. The isolation, I mean. You just learn to live with it, to keep going." Zura leaned back in her seat, her gaze turning thoughtful. "I understand the concept of isolation. My people, we don't experience loneliness in the same way you do. But I can see how difficult it must be. That's why I asked about Earth. I wanted to know what you miss, What makes you human? Her words made John pause. He had never really thought about it like that before. He had always seen himself as just another soldier, just another person doing his job. But Zura's perspective, seeing him as someone who was still connected to something, to a world far away, made him feel like there was more to him than just the missions and the assignments. "I miss the little things," John said, his voice softer now. "Like walking outside, feeling the wind on your face. I miss my family, too. I haven't been back to Earth in years." Zura seemed to understand. She didn't push him for more details, didn't ask about his family or his past. Instead, she simply nodded, her expression calm and accepting. "I see," she said. "I will try to understand more. I want to know what makes you who you are. What makes you human." John felt a warmth in his chest. It was strange how easy it was to talk to her. Despite the difference in their species, despite the strange circumstances that had brought them together, Zura made him feel heard, like he wasn't alone. Their conversations became a bit more frequent, more relaxed. They talked about Earth, about her world, about the things they enjoyed and the things they didn't. Zura even shared some of her own culture, describing the ancient rituals of her people, how they valued harmony and balance. John listened, intrigued by the way she spoke, how everything in her world seemed so precise and deliberate. It was a stark contrast to the chaos and unpredictability of life on Earth. Still, there were moments when John felt the tension return, when the weight of their situation pressed down on him again. He wasn't sure if he could ever truly accept the idea of being paired with Zura, of living with someone he had never chosen. The idea still felt foreign, something that had been forced upon him. But Zura never seemed to rush him. She never pushed for more than he was willing to give. She was patient, understanding, and that made it easier for John to open up little by little. One evening, as the stars drifted by outside, John found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. He wasn't sure where this strange partnership would lead, but for the first time, he felt a sense of peace. He wasn't just stuck in an uncomfortable situation anymore. He was beginning to understand that maybe, just maybe, this partnership with Zura wasn't the burden he had thought it would be. He looked over at her, sitting across the table, her eyes focused on the stars outside. She seemed so different from the woman he had expected, so different from the cold, distant alien he had feared. She was kind, thoughtful, and for the first time, John felt like maybe they could make this work. "Zura," he said, his voice soft. She turned to him, her expression calm but expectant. "I don't know what this is going to be," John continued, his words hesitant but sincere. "But I'm willing to try. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I think it's worth a shot." Zura's smile was the only answer he needed. It wasn't much, but it was enough. And for the first time, John felt like maybe he wasn't so alone in this, after all. As the days passed, John's thoughts about Zura shifted. What had started as an uncomfortable and forced arrangement was beginning to feel more like something he could get used to. The more he got to know her, the more he realized how much they had in common, despite their differences. She was intelligent, curious, and surprisingly patient. She seemed to understand him in ways he hadn't expected, and her willingness to adapt to his world made him feel less isolated, less like a stranger in his own life. But the reality of their situation was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. Their relationship was still based on an intergalactic mandate, a law that had assigned them to each other. That thought never fully left John's mind, no matter how comfortable he became with Zura. The knowledge that their bond wasn't a choice still felt like a heavy weight. One evening, as they sat together in the ship's common area, the quiet hum of the engines surrounding them, John couldn't help but bring up something that had been bothering him. "Zura," he began, his voice hesitant. "Can I ask you something?" She turned toward him, her green eyes focused and attentive. "Of course, John. What's on your mind?" He paused, unsure of how to phrase it. This wasn't a conversation he'd ever expected to have, especially not with an alien assigned to him. But Zura had become someone he could talk to, someone who wasn't just an alien stranger. "I've been thinking a lot," he said slowly, "about the whole reason we're here, about why we're paired together. You said it's not your choice, but you still agreed to it, right? Like, you didn't have a say in it, but you're still here." Zura's expression softened, and she nodded. "Yes, I'm here because it's the law, and I have to comply with it. But I'm also here because I want to understand you, John. I want to learn what it means to be human, to experience the things you do." John looked down at his hands, unsure of what to say next. He had wanted to ask about her feelings on the arrangement, about how she truly felt. But hearing her speak with such sincerity made him feel like maybe he had been overthinking everything. Maybe the situation wasn't as bad as he had made it out to be. "You're not just doing this because you have to, are you?" John asked quietly. Zura's response was immediate, her tone firm and clear. "No, I'm not. I know the law requires this, but I've learned that being forced into something doesn't mean it's all bad. We can make the best of it if we try." John considered her words. He had always been so focused on the fact that they had been forced into this arrangement. It was hard to shake the idea that there was no choice in the matter, but Zura's calm acceptance made him realize something. Maybe the law didn't define them. Maybe, just maybe, it was up to them to define what this partnership would be. The thought made him uneasy, but at the same time, it made him feel something else. Something like hope. "I guess I never thought about it that way," John said, his voice quieter now. "I've been so focused on the fact that this isn't what I wanted, that I didn't think about the fact that you might not want this either." Zura smiled gently, her eyes soft with understanding. "It's not easy for either of us, John, but it doesn't have to be all bad. If we both try, if we both put in the effort, we can make it something worthwhile." John looked at her, really, looked at her for the first time. Zura wasn't just an alien species, a creature from another world. She was a person, just like him. She had her own thoughts, her own desires, her own hopes. And right now, they were both in the same boat, navigating a situation neither of them had chosen. He let out a long breath, feeling the weight of it all. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what he had imagined. But maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. "Yeah," he said slowly, "I guess we can try. We can try to make it work." Zura's smile widened, and for the first time, John felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. It wasn't a magic solution. There was no easy way out. But he felt like they had reached a new understanding, a new place, where they could both move forward, together. The conversation shifted after that, as it often did. They talked about their days, about the strange things that had happened on their mission, about what lay ahead. The silence between them didn't feel uncomfortable anymore. It felt peaceful even. They were learning to coexist, to understand each other in ways neither had expected. As the hours passed, the ship continued its journey through the stars. Outside, the vastness of space stretched endlessly in every direction, a reminder of how far they had come from Earth. But inside the ship, inside the little bubble of their shared space, John felt something new, a sense of calm, of connection. It wasn't the same as the home he had left behind, but it was something. And right now, that was enough. As the days passed, John and Zura found themselves adapting to their new routine with a sense of unease mixed with acceptance. The awkwardness from the first few days had faded, replaced by a steady understanding between them. They weren't friends yet, but they were something more than strangers. It was strange to think that this arrangement, born out of necessity and law, had become something manageable. But despite the growing comfort between them, there was a nagging feeling in John's chest. He hadn't told Zura about his concerns, the doubts that still lingered in his mind. He hadn't told her how the idea of being bound to her, even in the simplest terms, still made him feel like he was being controlled. He had always prided himself on his freedom, his ability to make his own choices. But now, here he was, stuck in a situation where his choices were limited. The universe, it seemed, had a way of making him face things he never thought he would have to. One evening, as the ship coasted through another quiet stretch of space, John and Zura sat together, as they often did now. The lights in the common room were dim, casting a soft glow over the small space. The sound of the ship's engine hummed in the background, a constant reminder that they were moving forward, leaving behind the past. Zura looked over at John, her green eyes thoughtful. "You seem distant tonight," she said gently. "Is something on your mind?" John hesitated. It wasn't easy for him to open up, not about something like this, but he had promised himself that he would try to be honest with her, that he wouldn't let the silence between them fester. "I've been thinking a lot," he admitted, his voice quieter than usual. "About this partnership, about how we got here." Zura's expression softened, her head tilting slightly as she listened. She didn't interrupt. She simply waited for him to continue. "I never asked for this," John said, looking away, his gaze fixed on the stars outside the window. "I didn't choose this, and neither did you. It's just hard for me, you know, to accept that my life has been changed so suddenly by something I had no control over." Zura nodded slowly, her eyes understanding. "I understand," she said quietly. "It's not easy. I didn't ask for this either, but I've come to realize that it doesn't have to be something bad. We don't have to let this be something we resent. We can make the best of it, together." John let out a long breath. "I want to believe that," he said, "but sometimes I wonder if I'm just trapped. I've never been good at following rules, at letting someone else decide what's best for me. I've always wanted to be the one in control of my life, and now I don't feel like I am." Zura remained silent for a moment, letting his words sink in. Then she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "John, I know this is hard. I know it's not the life you imagined for yourself, and it's not the life I imagined either. But that doesn't mean we're trapped. It just means we have to choose how we live with this, how we move forward." John looked at her then, her calm demeanor giving him a sense of peace. She wasn't angry, or disappointed, or impatient. She was simply offering him understanding. It was more than he had expected, more than he had felt in years. "How do we move forward?" he asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. "How do we make this work when it wasn't even our choice?" Zura reached out, placing a hand gently on his arm. The gesture was simple, but it carried a warmth that made John feel like he wasn't alone in this anymore. "We move forward by accepting that we don't have all the answers. We move forward by understanding that we can't change the past, but we can control how we approach the future. We don't have to be the same people we were before. We can grow together." Her words, simple as they were, struck John deeply. He had been fighting this reality, fighting the idea that he was being controlled, being told what to do, but maybe, just maybe, he was looking at it the wrong way. Maybe this wasn't about control. Maybe it was about finding something new, something unexpected, in a place he had never imagined. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," he said, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "But I want to try. I want to try to make this work, because I don't want to be alone in this, not with you here." Zura's smile was soft and sincere. You don't have to be alone, John. You don't have to carry this burden by yourself. I'm here, and we'll figure it out together. For the first time since he had been paired with her, John felt a sense of hope, a sense of possibility. The future wasn't clear, and it certainly wasn't easy, but maybe that was okay. Maybe the struggle, the uncertainty, was part of the process. They spent the rest of the evening talking, sharing more about their worlds, about the things that made them who they were. And as the stars drifted by outside, John felt something shift inside him. He wasn't trapped. He wasn't bound by some unchangeable law. He was moving forward, just like the ship, and maybe that was enough. As the night grew late and the quiet hum of the ship filled the space between them, John felt something he hadn't expected. Peace. Not just with Zura, but with the situation as a whole. He didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time he felt ready to face it.